I'm going to show you how to make this really simple fabric coaster, and I'm going to share a few tips on how to get a more polished finish, which will be important if you want to sell these coasters. So the first tip is to iron your fabric before you cut it. That'll just help ensure your cuts are cleaner and your sizes are more accurate. And we're going to have two pieces of fabric, one for the bottom, one for the top, and a piece of batting. I'm using fusible interfacing, which has a glue on this one side that when I heat it up with the iron, it'll stick to my piece of fabric. But if you aren't using fusible interfacing, you can use a temporary fabric glue, either in glue stick form or spray form, to adhere the batting to your piece of fabric, which will just keep it in place when you turn it right side out to ensure that it doesn't get crumpled in there. So the reason that the batting is slightly smaller than the fabric is so that when you turn it right side out, you won't have as much bulk in the seams, which will also give you a nice clean look. So you're gonna line your batting up and either use your fabric glue and then press it into place, or if you're using fusible fleece, then we'll use our iron. And you can just eyeball this or use a ruler to make sure that you're getting it an even distance away from the edge and it's nice and centered. And then just press it into place. Now the other trick that I like to use is a tailor's clapper, but you can use a heavy piece of wood as well, just to press the fabric into place. It will absorb some of the steam and help it cool faster, and just press out some of those wrinkles. You can use it on seams to get your seams flatter and more crisp. And you just want to press that up and down. Same thing when you're using your iron, it's a pressing motion rather than a circular or rubbing motion, because that'll make sure that you're not stretching the fibers of the fabric while they're warm. And the other reason I like to do this is to make sure that my fabric is cool before I start to sew, just to ensure that it doesn't stretch at all when I'm sewing it. So now we're gonna sew our pieces together. So you'll start with one piece sitting right side up and the other piece sitting right side down, so that the right sides of fabric are meeting, and make sure that if you have any pattern, that it's going in the right direction. And if you want it crisscross, that's fine too. And so we're going to sew all the way around, and we'll use this piece of batting as the guideline, which will give us a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And we'll start at one point, sew all the way around, and end about 2 inches away from that first point. So we leave an opening big enough that we'll be able to turn this right side out. You can clip these pieces of fabric or pin them together. I find that it's easy enough to sew just holding them into place. So we're going to start at our second line. Again, using that piece of batting as a guideline to give us a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You'll start with a back stitch, sew up to the corner, and once you get there, you can just lift your presser foot and pivot. Okay, and we're stopping at that first line and back stitching, and then you can snip your threads. So now before we turn this coaster right side out, you're going to trim your corners at a 45-degree angle, which will reduce the bulk within the coaster. You want to get it fairly close to your stitch line, but obviously not cutting into it, and not too close, or when you push those corners out, this edge can come through easily. So about a millimeter or two away from your stitched corner. Okay, now we can use that opening to turn it right side out. You can work slowly and gently here so that you don't rip any of your stitches. You don't stretch the fabric. Now that you've got it mostly turned right side out, we're going to use a point turner to push the corners out. If you don't have one of these, you can also use a knitting needle or a chopstick. You can also use a pin to pull those corners out, but I find this works really well. So just gently push the corners out until they look nice and clean and like you've got a 90-degree corner. Now we can give it a press, and we want to make sure that these edges look nice and straight so that you won't notice them once we top stitch to close it in. So you can just check that, and if you need to, just use your fingers while it's still warm to kind of roll the fabric in or out to get that nice clean edge. And now we can also use a little bit of water to take some of those creases out. And again, try to just mostly press up and down. You can also, while it's warm, if these edges aren't quite turned all the way out, same thing, just roll it between your fingers to get them turned all the way out. Check it from the other side, maybe give it a little bit of water. Pretty good. I'll use my clapper again. Okay, now we're going to top stitch to close up that and to close up the opening and to finish it off. And if you like, you can use a ruler and a fabric pen to mark where your corners are going to be. I do about a top stitch about a 1/4 inch away from the edge. So just so I know exactly where to lift my presser foot and turn my piece of fabric, I'll mark where 1/4 inch away is on each of my corners. And if you're not great at sewing straight lines yet, you can do the same thing and just carry that line all the way around. So you can just follow that line while you're sewing. And again, make sure you're using a fabric pen so that those marks will come out once you're finished. So I'm going to use a longer stitch on my sewing machine, which will give a cleaner finish, and it helps you sew a straighter line. So you'll start, again, 1/4 inch away from the edge, and we're going to back stitch once, and we'll use these lines so we know where to pivot our fabric. And back stitch at the beginning. And back stitch at the end. So now we'll give it another press just to get rid of those marks. And make sure everything looks nice and clean. And there's your finished coaster.